Syntax of verbal sentences. We looked at word order before in a different module, and we said that the expected word order, the order of words in a sentence, is VSO. And I'm writing this in the Hebrew direction, so like this. And so we had an example, or we can look at an example like this. Zachar hamelech et ha'eved. So what do we have first here? We have Zachar, right? So it's the Cal perfect, third masculine singular. It's the form with no endings. So that's our subject, or sorry, our verb, subject. It's our verb. Then we have a noun, hamelech, the king. So that would be our subject. We expect the subject to follow the verb. And then we have et ha'eved. Eved means servant. So, and we just studied et in the previous module. So we know we have an object. And in fact, we know it's a direct object and a definite direct object, because et would only go with a definite direct object. So VSO, here's our example. Now we can add a little bit more to this. We can say a little more. That's useful. Seo in his grammar on page 149-150 gives a more nuanced presentation that I think is helpful. The more clues we have when we read Hebrew, the better. So if we put down our order, V, S, O, that's what we had so far. Seo says that what you can get here is circumstance. Circumstantial words will come first. And this is what he means by that. I'll quote him. He says, any adverb or adverbial phrase that places a narrative in context, now, then, now, at that time, after these events, etc., takes first position. So, adverbs or adverbial phrases that place the entire statement in context. They can be temporal words that tell you something about when this is happening, like then, or then could be sequential, I guess. Now, at that time, or they could be logical sequential words like after these events, or perhaps then. So they will come first, before the verb. They kind of set up the whole sentence. You also have words that'll show up there like hine. Hine is often translated behold or look, but it's used for more than just that. It's actually used for things like switching point of view in a narrative. We'll deal with this according to Ross's sequence, which is chapter 28, so quite a while down the road. The other thing that can happen, that can sit here at the beginning, and I guess is circumstantial, is negation. And I'll show you an example of that in a second, but lo means not, so negation comes here at the beginning too. So, Seo is saying, first position here is circumstance. Then number 2 is verb. Okay, we already had that, no problem. Number 3 is subject. And then for object, he divides it up into 2 groups. He says, I'll put 4 and 5 here. 4 is the indirect object. The fourth thing you expect is the indirect, oops, not ID, I-O, indirect object, and number 5 is the direct object. So we're effectively dividing our object into 2 types. Now most of the examples I looked at so far, we really only dealt with direct objects. So what is an indirect object? We should take a look at that. Here's an English sentence to look at indirect objects. So I gave the bone to the dog. I is the subject, gave is the verb, the bone is what I gave, so that's our direct object. And to the dog is the indirect object. It's who I gave the bone to. Indirect object. So in this English sentence, the indirect object is following the direct object, but you can also have a sentence like this. I gave the dog a bone. So we have subject, verb. I gave what? I gave a bone. So our direct object is over here. And I gave it to the dog. So I gave the dog a bone. Here the indirect object is preceding the direct object. Anyway, That's just a review of what indirect objects are as opposed to direct objects. Let's look at a Hebrew example of word order. So here's a sentence. We have Az Shama Hamelech Alehem. Az means then. So this is our circumstantial bit. What Sale calls circumstance first, and then Shama. Shama means to hear, so there's our verb. Hamelech, the king, okay, no problem. We got a noun, so function is a subject. Then Alehem. What this is the indirect object. It means the king, or then the king listened to them. Now the indirect object in Hebrew is often preceded by either el, which means to, or le, the inseparable preposition le. So here we have, and then hem here. I will deal with the morphology of this later, but hem means them. So to them. The king listened, then the king listened to them. Let's look at another example. Natan Adonai lachem et haaretz. So do we have a circumstantial bit here? No, we don't. We have Natan. This means he gave. So we have our verb. And, or I guess it's perfect, so we should probably translate it as past. Adonai is our subject. Lachem, so this is now an indirect object using le. Remember I said the previous one on the last page had el. This one has le. So to you. And so that's our indirect object. Et haaretz. So we know this here, et marks a definite direct object, so we have direct object. So here's an example. Let me redo this here. Too many papers in the way. Over my keyboard. So indirect object. This is an example of the indirect object preceding the direct object. In the previous example, we didn't have a direct object at all. We just had the indirect object. And this was showing a use of the circumstantial bit at the beginning. So circumstance, verb, subject, indirect object, and in this one there is no direct object. Here in this example we have no circumstance, or no circumstantial bit, but we have verb, subject, indirect object, direct object. And here we have the indirect object marked with le. We have a change here, but don't worry about that. We know we have the lamed there. And here we had the indirect object marked with L. L there. Okay. I also said that negation can come at the beginning of a sentence. I guess you could consider that circumstantial. It's something that sets up the whole statement. So here we have lo shamarta et ha-Torah. Lo means not. So I guess you could call this circumstantial. And then shamarta, do you recognize this? Should we parse this? So we know we have kal. I wouldn't give you anything other than kal at this point. We know it's perfect because it fits the form. And that's all we've had so far. Perfect. And what is this ending here? Do you recognize that? Shamarta. This is second person, masculine, singular. And it's perfect, so we'll translate it as a past. Shamar means to keep. If you have an I in here, it means to hear. Shama means to hear. Shamar means to keep, as in to keep the law. So, you, masculine singular, did not, here's our not in English, you say it that way. You did not keep what? Et ha-Torah, the Torah. So here, this is our verb, and here, this is our direct object, right? We got et, so direct object. In fact, definite direct object. So, this is an example of lo at the beginning of a sentence. And my next example, my last example here, I guess this really is already shown in the previous example. All I want to show here is that the subject is sometimes embedded in the verb, as you already know. Zachru et Adonai. Maybe we should parse this. Good practice. Zachar means to keep, or sorry, to remember. So Zachru. We have a kal. It's kal. It's perfect. Do you recognize the form? Zachru. Vocalic ending, remember? So there's only two that have that. There's the 3FS and the 3CP. So this is third common plural, Zacharu, so they, 3CP. So they remembered the Lord. So our verb is here, our definite direct object is here. Where's the subject? Well, it's embedded right in here. So that's all I wanted to note with that. And actually, our previous example had it embedded too. You, the subject is embedded right in here. Shamarta, you kept, or in this case, did not keep. So our order, our nuanced presentation of the order is circumstance, verb, subject, indirect object, and then direct object.